What's up, guys? This is Coach Grant with First Down Training, and today we're going to be breaking down some things that all rare wide receivers do with their route running that will take them to that next level. So I hope this video helps you guys out. Hope it could teach you a few new things, but also, fellas, if you are a wide receiver and you struggle knowing what kind of drills you should be doing for your route running, your press releases, your hands, check out that very first link in the description below for our 28-day on-field wide receiver workout plan. You'll get access to over 100 plus drills, all mapped out for you with a daily schedule for a full month with sets, reps, and video examples of each drill. So check out that very first link below if you're interested in that, fellas. Let's get started with this video. So now, one thing that a rare wide receiver will do is they are able to get out of a break at the top of the route on a comeback, on a curl, on maybe a dig in 3 steps. So this is much easier said than done. I know I'm a big believer in eliminating wasted time at the top of the break, not so much wasted steps. However, if you can shoot for eliminating wasted steps while having good form, while being able to sell your routes, you're going to be that more efficient. And not a lot of wide receivers can do this. So we're looking at this route from Diontae Johnson. He's running this like curl type route where he snaps down and he's able to get out of this thing in 3 steps. So everybody knows that when I'm running a route, number one thing that I have to do is sell what? I got to sell fade. I have to make this DB think it is a fade until it is not a fade. So I got to make sure I'm running hard. That means I'm running as hard as not so much as hard as you can where you're out of control, but it's like a controlled full speed. You got to have control, but you got to be running hard. Number 2, you got to make sure that you are running in full stride. We cannot take choppy steps leading up to this break point. We have to be able to break down, drop my hips in full stride. And then number 2, I can't give it away with my body language by raising my chest up right before I drop my hips. Everybody should know that. Those 3 things are a given, but those 3 things what will sell fade for you. Now, at the top of the break, when you guys drop into a route, everybody I'm sure has probably heard of something called a trigger step or a snap, like some people call it snapping down. That's what I call it. I'll also use both terms, but you snap down or trigger step. So that's the step that is going to get you to put the brakes on a route. So a trigger step in this case on a curl, this is how I would teach a curl. Some people will teach inside foot. It adds 1 extra step to your break, and I'm going to explain how in a second. But on a curl, I would teach snapping down with the outside foot. Sometimes when you're against man coverage, you can't necessarily break at the outside foot because you might get to the landmark and have to drop right now, and you might not be on your outside foot, so you can't run past the depth of the route. But if it's a perfect world, I love the outside foot, especially if it's like a 12 back to 10-yard curl, probably my 4th outside step. So when you're breaking off of your outside foot, to get out of a break in 3 steps, number 1, that trigger step, you have to make sure we are getting low and being able to put the brakes on. Now, the trigger step, we can't do this or we can't get out of the break least amount of steps possible if we don't have good form. I need to try to bring my chin to my knee. I need to drop my butt down like I'm sitting in a chair. And when I do that, it's got to happen violently. Everybody loves to say the term or claim the term, oh, you want to be violent with your hips, right? But why? Why do you want to be violent with your hips? Because that's the only way you're going to slow down when you're doing those 3 things we discussed earlier. Running hard, running full stride, and having a good pad level. Try having a slow drop of your hips when you're running full speed. You're probably going to drift 5 yards upfield. You got to drop that pad level right now. So now when I do that, that puts me into a position of balance. This is where the steps are important to get you out and the least amount of steps possible. The second step after you snap down has to pivot. I call that a pivot step. So if we were running a curl, let's say instead of him just kind of running like kind of a curl and fading outside, let's say he was curling and running back to the quarterback on a 45. You would want to snap with the outside leg, then try to pivot your toe on that 45-degree angle. So now when you pivot your toe on that 45-degree angle, that's what's going to get your hips around. At the end of the day, running routes, getting out of your breaks is all about who can get their hips out of the break faster. Can the DB open up his hips or turn his hips to drive faster than we can flip my hips and get out of the break? So when you snap, we have to make sure we get low. When you pivot, we also have to make sure we stay low. So I get low at the snap, I pivot, but I stay low. So now the 3rd step is what will drive me out. And they call that, or I call that, I should say, the hook step. So it's a snap, a pivot, then a hook. Now this hook step is where you guys will get out in 3. A lot of people can snap and a lot of people can pivot. But when you hook this step around and you're concerned with driving off of that hook step rather than just stepping for the sake of stepping, that's when you can get out of this thing. So Johnson here, when he hooks it around, snap, pivot, hook, he takes a little bit of a double step with that. I think how you can avoid that step right there is by being harder with that hook step. Those are three powerful steps at the top of the break. You snap down, get low or being violent. You pivot, that's a hard step. Your whole foot is in the ground. And that hook step, that is also a hard step to drive you back out. But again, fellas, it's not so much I would say about steps. We want to shoot for getting out the least amount of steps possible, but so many guys worry about steps too much. Then they don't sell vertical. They slow down because they're so worried about steps. Fellas, you could get out in one step on a curl route, but run half speed. And guess what? The DB is going to lock you up because you never threatened him with the fade. Let's focus on threatening him with the fade, dropping on a dime, and if you get that stuff down, then let's worry about the pivot in the hook step. But that's why I bring it up in this video. There's only rare wide receivers. Every wide receiver cannot do this. Rare wide receivers are able to get out of their breaks in 3 steps while maintaining good form because they emphasize the details of running routes. These details are important, fellas. A lot of people neglect this stuff. A lot of people think it's just going out there and running to a spot and breaking. Those little details is what will help you against a talented DB, not just some scrub DB. Okay, so now this next example here is going to be from Jerry Jeudy, and something that rare wide receivers do, I kind of touched on it in the last example, is being able to cut in stride. Now, when you guys cut in stride, something that you can do to work on this is running your routes off of steps. This is something that I do with every single wide receiver that I train, every single wide receiver that comes to one of our camps. We will run routes off of steps before anything. Now, again, not every single situation is going to be off of steps. You might get press coverage where you can't think about steps. You're worried about getting off the press and getting to a landmark. But when it's zone, when it's off man, your routes should be ran off of steps. So let's look at what Jeudy does here. He's going to be breaking off of his 4th inside step. So the 4th step that he takes with his right foot is the break point. And this is why so many wide receivers are able to cut at such a high speed because they're comfortable with this. So let's count his steps. That's 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th. Breaks this thing right off. That is the definition of cutting in stride, fellas, not slowing ourselves down. Because here's what happens. When you got zone coverage, and again, especially at the NFL level, I know most of your goals are to play at the college level. And some of you have goals to play at the NFL level, fine. But especially at the college level, everything is so timing based. That quarterback is throwing that thing so early, he is putting it to a spot and he expects us to be at that spot. So imagine this is what so many high school wide receivers do. Let's say Jeudy, this is like a 15-yard out route, right? This is like 15. Guys will run up and they start to slow down at 12, 13 yards and they make this weak break and then they break at 15. Fellas, that's not how we run routes, and that's going to give this route away to a DB, whether he's off in zone or whether he's pressed up. We can't be looking down at the yardage. We can't be chopping my feet, preparing for a break. We have to get a step count. Now, in a game, you're probably not even thinking about a step count. It's been done so many times by Jeudy and by the quarterback in practice that it's a natural habit. Quarterback knows exactly when Judy's breaking, and Jeudy knows exactly when to put that foot in the ground because they've repped it a million times. So I'm not saying to completely neglect yardage. Like I said, when it's man coverage, like let's say instead of that DB being off, he's pressed up. You can't give a release move, work outside, then count your steps, and then go. Now, sometimes I'll work that with wide receivers because we don't have yardage out there. You're on a grass field, maybe you don't have yardage, you don't have a yard mark, you don't have a landmark. I'll have them run routes off of steps off of a press release to work on them cutting in stride. But again, it's something that we cannot think about when it's press coverage, only when it's off coverage. So I suggest, fellas, every single route that you run when you're training this offseason, there's not a DB in front of you, should be off of steps. You're running a slant, it should be off of 3 steps. 1, 2, and then 3. You're running a 5-yard out, it should be off of 4 steps. You're running a bang 8 post, it should be off of your 3rd outside step. Now, why do we only count outside steps or inside steps? Why wouldn't I count 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5 and break it off on the bang 8 post, where it's your 3rd outside step? Reason why I don't do that is that's too many numbers going on in my head. We're already got enough to worry about. We already got a full play that we're running. We can't be thinking about too many numbers counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We can't be doing that. It's got to be quick. It's got to be efficient. And counting outside or inside steps is how you can do that. So being able to cut in stride, fellas, is one of those things that all rare wide receivers are able to do. So make sure this is something that you were trying to add to your tool belt this offseason. Great example there from Jeudy cutting in stride and winning on that route. Okay, so now, one other thing that rare wide receivers do, this is a clip here from Thayer Thomas. He's a wide receiver out of North Carolina State, and that is being able to sell their releases with their upper body and fully commit to the move that they are trying to do. So Thomas here is going to be working something called a dive release. So some of you might be familiar with a dive release. I love a dive release when this DB is in head-up press. So when he's in head-up press, a dive is where you're essentially trying to sell like you're running a drag. So you're just crossing his face for 2 hard steps. You would step with your left foot across, then you would break off of your right foot. Now for those 2 steps, obviously we were trying to make it look like a drag. We're trying to get this DB to crash so we could slip back outside and run it out, run a fade, run a corner, whatever it might be. So when I take those 2 steps, DB's eyes in man coverage are supposed to be where? Watching hips. A lot of wide receivers can't do this because they lack the technique or the comfortability cutting on a dime. So let's watch this full speed. So he comes off the ball, dives inside, gets that DB to commit because he committed his hips and shoulders. When you guys come off the ball, like let's break this down to an example everybody knows. You got inside shade press and you got to run a slant. So you do something called a diamond release, where you take 3 hard steps to the outside of the outside shoulder of the DB, trying to get him to open up so we slip under and run a slant. So on a dive, it's the opposite, right? But you watch when he crosses the ball. His hips and his shoulders and his speed and his stride. All they're telling this DB, he's running a drag, running a slant. So that's going to force him to have to move. A lot of guys are always asking me like, oh, well, what if the DB doesn't move? What if he sits there? That can't be my mindset. My mindset needs to be, I'm going to make this guy move. I'm going to make him move off his platform because I'm going to run hard. I'm going to commit my hips and shoulders because that's where he's watching, and that's what will get me open. And it is rare for wide receivers to do that consistently. What so many wide receivers will do on a release like this is they'll come off the ball, they'll take 2 hard steps, but before they cut, their left hip and their left shoulder, in this case, will start to turn to the outside. And when you start to give the route away, number one, that cut's going to be outside of your frame because your body's going here and your foot's going there. So that's a good way to injure your knee, injure your ankle, your Achilles, because you're cutting outside of your frame at a fast pace. Number 2, when you start to round it and when you start to turn your hips and shoulders before the cut, you're not committed to it. That lets the DB know where we're going. You turn your hips, DB's going to turn. It's fact of the matter how it is. Now, another mistake guys will make. And again, I know we were talking about selling with my upper body, but a lot of guys will do this. They'll have their hips and shoulders committed, but they don't go nowhere. They don't actually run in full stride. They take choppy steps. Just like that very first example from Deontay Johnson, we were talking about selling fade. When it comes to selling your releases, it's got to be the same thing. You got to commit to it. We got to have speed, and we actually got to step there. We actually got to cover ground because that's the only way this DB feels threatened, especially a disciplined DB. I'm not talking about some scrub second string guy in high school. I'm talking about a guy who's a legitimate guy who's been coached and has technique. Let's play this thing again, full speed one more time. Great job by Thomas getting that DB to move and then winning on that corner. All right, fellas, really want to thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. If you guys have any questions at all, don't hesitate to leave those in the comment section below. Always appreciate the feedback. It's always great to hear from you guys. And again, fellas, if you guys would like a 4-week wide receiver on-field workout schedule, over 100+ wide receiver drills that you can do, check out that very first link in the description below. I'll see you guys next time.